I'm going to give a presentation tonight and talk a little bit about why there might be so much mystery around lace and some of the historical background to the subject, show you some nice pictures of lace, and also I'm going to share some resources. I'll be putting together a resource page, which I'll publish on my website. So you'll be able to find that later if you'd like. And my website is basically my first and last name.com. So it's not hard to find. And I'll show you at the end again to remind you. So lace piqued my interest as a person who likes to sew. But a long time ago, I lived in Montreal and I went to the flea market. And I was able to buy an Edwardian collar made of French silk lace, and it was gorgeous. And since then, you know, it set me wondering, the lace that I found that I could buy, you know, at the store in the fabric shop and that was available to me was pretty simple stuff. I mean, it was nice, but it was nowhere near the glory of that Edwardian lace. And so I got to wondering, well, can you still buy that stuff, you know? Handmade lace, are they still making it somewhere over in France? Can you buy it by the yard? Can you buy it by the piece? And that was the genesis of this exploration in lace. So there are lots of kinds of lace, and the definition of lace itself is just a net-like ornamental fabric made of threads by hand or machine. So the threads can be, I'm sure you're not surprised, cotton or silk or rayon, polyester, but they also can be metal. They can be silver or gold, and that actually goes back for hundreds of years. They can be put together by knitting or tatting or crocheting, or by the classic needle lace or bobbin lace. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is primarily needle and bobbin lace. There's more than a bit of snobbery attached to lace, and real lace was a term that came about the turn of the last century, and it was used to talk about needle lace and bobbin lace that was made by hand. And it was an effort to maintain those industries in the face of mechanization. So we'll be talking mostly about needle and bobbin lace. Now, needle lace, if you think about it, is just made with a needle and thread. One piece of thread and one needle. And so when you're looking at it under a microscope or a magnifying glass, you should be able to trace the thread. It's based on kind of an elaboration of the buttonhole stitch. So if you look at a handmade buttonhole, you know, it's basically loops of thread. So this is an example of German needle lace made in the mountains of Germany. And it's gorgeous, of course. Often in making needle lace, medallions are made individually and then sewn together later, either by braided or kind of thread links, or the medallions are sewn onto a net base. This is an Italian needle lace called Point de Venice or Venetian lace. And as you can see, it's not on a net, it's held together by threads. Now, bobbin lace, this is an example, a close-up of bobbin lace being produced. And it's made with spindles or bobbins. Those aren't like, those long skinny things are called bobbins. They're a little different from those on our sewing machines. And each one has a thread attached, and it's twisted and braided. And it follows a pattern. You can see the pattern underneath this one, sketched out in pencil. And to hold it in place until it's fully formed, pins are used. And this is, bobbin lace is made using a pillow. Well, they call it a pillow. It's a stuffed like a bolster. And they're very picky about what goes in the bolster, and maybe oat straw versus other things. And the pillow is either held on a table or on the lace maker's lap. And sometimes it's also on a stand, a carved wooden stand. And so this is a picture of some Italian lace in process. It's a torchon lace, which is called peasant's lace sometimes because it's rougher than some of the other finishes. And you can see the pattern in the middle on the yellow piece of paper and the bobbins hanging there. Now, one thing that's interesting with bobbin lace is as you go through this, you'll see that everyone uses the same materials. There's not very much variation at all. Typically, it's a wooden or a bone bobbin, it's a pillow, and somebody's holding it in place, which would tend to indicate that bobbin lace arose and spread pretty quickly because there wasn't time for it to change, you know, manufacturing techniques as it went from one country to another. This is Bruges, Belgium, and those are lace makers. It's kind of a dark picture. And I don't know, Lorraine, if we can show a video or not. Well, if I link on this, do you think it'll show up? We'll see.
We can try. It doesn't work that well on WebEx, but give it a try. Let's see.
You booked us. Okay. This is only a 3-minute video.
Thanks. I think I'll remember forever.
Not working, Diane. It's not working. Diane,
Yes.
it's not working.
Okay. I'll shut that off. Okay. Well, I'll put that link. As I said, it's just a 3-minute video, and I'll put it on my resource page and you can watch it at home. What's interesting, at least to me, is the speed with which those spindles fly. You know, I always thought it'd be something kind of slow and methodical, but at least that woman just really gets things flying. This is torchon lace, the Italian lace that I showed you, and that was still on the bolster. This is another Valenciennes. It's a French lace, even though it's named after a town in Spain. And it's a bobbin lace. And they actually, when they're making this, simultaneously create the net backing and the flower motifs and the swags and all of that. So it just comes off as one steady sheet. Now, the origin of lace is not definitively known. Most people agree that it began in Italy. By the 1400s, it was certainly underway, but there's some talk of it being earlier, certainly in the 1300s, and that it may have begun in Sicily, and it may have been an elaboration of decorative work done by the Saracens, the Arabs. Other people talk about the drawn thread as a precursor This is a picture of a linen tablecloth or a bedcloth, and it's got faggoting. You can see each of those little bundles created by pulling out threads and used for decoration. So, you know, that's pretty simple decorative work. But if you go further, and people always go further with decoration, they start pulling out more threads and leaving really elaborate work behind until finally somebody figured out, like, well, darn, you know, it's so much work weaving linen, and then we're going to pull out most of the threads. Maybe we should just start with the threads that we want. And so they would trace a pattern and then apply the threads to try to create something without so much waste. Cut work and drawn thread work was very popular with the church and the clergy early for their vestments and their altar adornments and all that sort of stuff. And they were big customers for the lace market. And eventually, of course, wealthy people started to use it for their personal clothing. In Venice, noble women would entertain themselves by making lace. You know, it's very time consuming and they had a lot of time on their hands. Wealthy women were not expected to leave the home, so they were kind of homebound and they used their time doing that. And then eventually they started bringing in young girls to make lace for them as, you know, maids, and they would develop it into a cottage industry and a school. It got a little more organized. As you can see where this is some cut work and needle lace combined. And at some point in time, you know, people just decided to go all out. Here you see lace in the 1600s. And wealthy people just, and the nobility just really got a little excessive in the opinion of some of the powers that be. So sumptuary laws showed up. Now, sumptuous is not scrumptious, okay? Scrumptious is when something tastes good to eat. Sumptuous is where something looks pretty costly or extremely costly and rich and luxurious or magnificent. So there have been rules to control who gets to look good for centuries. Some of them were in early Greece. In Italy, as early as 1157, they put in place sumptuary laws as to who could wear what and how. And you could see it as sometimes it was sold as a moral issue. You know, people shouldn't be putting all their efforts into such self-adornment. And sometimes it was just strictly to keep people in their place. So classes were delineated. For example, only prostitutes in one town in Italy at one point in time could wear flat shoes or slippers. In 15th century Venice, only courtesans could dress well, but weren't allowed to wear pearls. And a courtesan is, of course, like a mistress of a wealthy man is the most typical meaning of that word. So, you know, they could look pretty good, but they couldn't wear pearls. Chopins are platform shoes, and there was this whole thing where people would wear shoes as high as 24 inches. Now, the reason they did that is because if you're wearing, and the shoes got so outrageous that they would need to have a servant on either side to help them balance because they really couldn't walk in them. But if you were up 2 feet taller, then your clothes used more fabric. So if your clothes used more fabric, that meant you had a lot of discretionary money. So shoe height was a big deal. long sleeves. You know, we've seen these Renaissance pictures of folks with long sleeves, and I don't know what if you thought about why they were so long. Well, part of that is seen as an effort to use more fabric or to show that they could use more fabric. Now, it's like playing whack-a-mole. Every time there was a law, somebody would figure out a way to get around it, you know? They tried to, the powers that be tried to restrict the use of silver and gold, for instance, silver and gold cloth. And show you. One way to get around the sumptuary laws, this is Lucretia de Medici, and she's, I think, 16 in this picture, and she certainly died not too long after of tuberculosis. But before she died, she got her portrait painted, and her sleeves have little slashes up at the shoulder. And with those slashes, then really fine fabric could show from underneath. So maybe you were forbidden to wear this fine fabric, but you could cut your on the outside. So to get around it, they would cut their clothing. And slash clothing was often regulated. They went just bonkers over slash clothing in the Renaissance. They would slash their shoes, their doublets, their sleeves. They did it all different ways. And that was a way to display the fine satins and silks and laces that were underneath that might be forbidden to have too much of showing. So here's the slash sleeve. Now this man, obviously he's showing his lace. This is in the probably the 1600s, I guess. He's only 29, but his sleeves are slashed and show what's underneath. Now, in 1634, we had sumptuary laws in America, and of course, you might not be surprised to learn that the Puritans set off some sumptuary laws. So in Massachusetts in 1634, you were not allowed to make our own lace. It was just against the law. In 1651, lace was legal under certain conditions. So if your estate was 200 pounds or less, you were not allowed to wear gold or silver lace. The only lace you could wear was lace that, bobbin lace, that cost less than 2 shillings a yard. You couldn't wear any gold or silver buttons either. So sumptuary laws were fun. Now, again, people always try to game the system. And one way they game it, let's see which is coming next, is they leave. The lace makers just up and left. They got tired of this and they would flee. They also fled often in wartime, or there were religious wars in Europe, and they would leave. So this is a picture from Valdosta, the Aosta in Italy. And I have to tell you, my great-grandmother is from Aosta, so I found it interesting to find this picture of somebody making bobbin lace in Aosta. Well, then when I looked into it, they're making what's called dentelle de cogne. And there's a difference in this lace from the other bobbin lace that we saw because there's no pattern. And there's a reason for that, which I believe. The lace, what happened was in 1665, the nuns from Cluny Monastery in France fled. I'm not sure why they fled, but they left, and they went up in the mountains by Aosta, which, although now it's Italian, at that time it was French. And they were hidden by different families. And when they were with the families, they started showing them how to make bobbin lace as a way to make money or a subsistence, or, you know, a good thing to do. And I would imagine the reason these women do not use a pattern is the nuns must have left in a hurry and didn't have their patterns. So it's all done by memory. They currently still do it. They've got 40 lace makers in this little town. and they make about 1,500 meters of lace a year. So with the sumptuary laws and religious turmoil and wars, lace makers fled to a variety of places in Europe. And Belgium was making lace by the 1400s. And you can find that the patterns and the styles evolved over time. And sometimes they'll have a French name, even though they're an Italian lace, because French was considered the language of fashion. Now, this is a Brussels lace in Belgium. And again, this is a needle lace. And you can see the motifs, and they're held together by what look like strings, but threads. This is in Belgium. These are lace makers, obviously later. And often the lace making was done out of doors because of the lighting issue. You have to be able to see to do that type of fine work. And they often were done with groups of people. So women would get together and sit outside and make their lace. This is in Belgium. This is in Saint Pierre, P-A-E-R. And of course, there's a nun leading this session of lace making. Much of the lace making was kept going by the nuns. Of course, they could then create religious, American, didn't see this, ecclesiastic cloths, textiles, vestments, and the like. And they still, in some cases, maintain that history. This is a Brussels lace jabot from the mid-1700s. Now, this is what a jabot is. There you go. She was big into jabots. Jabot is just a fancy name for a neck ruffle. Here's a lace maker in Belgium. And also when we're going through these lace maker pictures, they must have been favorite subjects for painters. And if you think about it, you're making lace, you're sitting there. It's something that you sit for hours and do. So it's perfect as a subject for a painter. And the other thing you'll notice is the lace makers are either outdoors or by a window. And if they're by a window, they usually have a potted plant there. She's got, I think it's geraniums. Maybe it's a rose. And often they have a bird, a little cage bird. She's got a cat, something to keep her company for over the hours. This is a Lanson lace. It's French. And many of these pictures come from a 1907 lace book. It's just a really good reference book, and you can find it. I found these on like Wikimedia Commons, so it's not hard. Now, okay. This is Pointe de Lanson, that's French. Here's some French lace makers. And again, they're in a group. You can see them. They've got their strips of lace. The bobbin lace is always in a strip. It's not in a big sheet. Lace curtains were never made by hand. To get that big of a piece of lace, you had to use a machine. Although you could, or a machine at least to do the netting. This is Chantilly lace. Chantilly lace is often black, and it's silk, and it was popular for mourning clothes because it's really beautiful and it's black. And it used to be people would be in formal mourning for like 6 months to a year when they lost a spouse. And there you see a shawl or a cloak out of Chantilly lace. This is Valenciennes lace. Again, that's a bobbin lace. This is Valenciennes made out of linen. Pointe de Venise Arreso. It's pretty. This is Honiton bobbin lace. You know, lace spread pretty much everywhere across Europe and into the UK. So this was a British lace. And as often happened in these British and American colonies, the lace makers were hinted to often be Huguenots, you know, French Protestants who left France because of religious persecution. There's a British lace maker, and you can see her little bird and her flowers. This is Carrick Macross lace, and this was made in Ireland. It was brought as a craft by someone trying to help people have an opportunity to make a living. They still make it. This is, I think that's probably around 1903 or so. 1900, let's see. Early 1900s, I would think. Now they're making the Carrick Macross. You can see even they've got their little flowers and they've got their bird cage and they're all settled together and making lace. Netherlands, this is a Vermeer picture. This is the Netherlands. And again, you know, if you've ever been to Holland, it tends to be a little overcast and windows are precious. This is in Sweden. You'll notice it's the same technique, same spindle, same pillow. She's got her flowers. She's ready to go. This is Russia in the Romantic period. So that'd be about 1820. And Capri. Brazil. And this is in India. This is a gold lace maker. This is about the only picture I found of a man making lace. And he's using a little different technique. This is Great Britain. One of the issues is there was a high labor cost. So because of all the time it took to make lace, or it still does take time if you're going to do it, it tends to be done by the poor. People who have no other choice, no other option to earn money. It doesn't pay well. In 1765, to make a meter, which you know is a little over a yard, of Valenciennes lace, bobbin lace, took 15 hours a day for a year to make a yard. So a pair of sleeve ruffles took 4 yards. So that would be either 4 people working for a year or 4 years. But the lace maker earned about a quarter of the cost of a sleeve ruffle, of a pair of sleeve ruffles for a year's work. Now, some people say that lace makers were at times preferentially incarcerated. What that means, if you were a lace maker and the authorities found out, there was a good chance you'd get stuck in jail versus someone else, because what you would make while you were in jail, just like when you're making license plates, you know, or whatever it is your local prison makes, you don't necessarily get paid. Well, now you get paid maybe a little, but back then you didn't get paid at all, but yet you'd still do forced labor. So forced labor for a lace maker, the jailer could sell that lace and make a fair amount of money. So you were at risk. Now, the other thing is, because it's a cottage industry, you know, it's something you can do at home, and it's also something that little children can be taught to do, and they were. So child labor was intimately involved in the lace making industry. They would have so-called lace making schools, and kids as young as 5 would go there. And there wouldn't necessarily be as much reading and writing as there should be, or if at all. And they would just basically work all day. And of course, this was not, here's a child in the Netherlands. This is Palermo, Sicily. And if you notice, the kids all have, the girls, they're all girls, and they have little sleeves on so that they don't get the lace dirty. And they're working outdoors. It was hard on their eyes. It also wasn't healthy to be that restricted in their activity, and of course, to be that stuck that close together all the time. Now, there were some good parts to it. People entertained themselves. This is the kids in Palermo taking a break. I think they're playing tug of war at a lace making school. The other thing they did is, this is adults and children, is they sang, and there's a whole collection of lace making songs. Now, these songs are very long because, you had all day if you were making lace. This is a lace making school. You can see the pattern that they're looking at, their material. They each have their little bobbins. This is probably in Italy. It could be in Spain. They're not sure. But it's a school of kids. Some of those children look to be about 6, 7. Now, there's only one place in the United States that in the late 1700s had a lace industry, and that's Ipswich, Massachusetts. There's questions as to where it originated. Some say that the people there locally were all from the Midlands of England, like that might have been where they brought that from. Others talk about, again, the Huguenots, that there might have been some Huguenots involved, but they were making lace. They were making bobbin lace. And they were making it early on because by 1639, there was a law saying they shouldn't be doing it, in that the law forbid anyone to buy or sell or wear or use lace. But they kept at it. And by the time of the American Revolution, they were big time making lace. Now, Martha Washington wore it. She had a shawl, and it's at Mount Vernon now, that they believe George picked up when he was on his post-election tour. And then she had another piece. It's at Mount Vernon as well. This is the beach at Ipswich. And here's an old picture of the town. And some of those are definitely date back to colonial times. That's a picture of one of Martha's dresses on display. Now, when Martha married George, her dress was colored. And typically, wedding dresses were colored. They were just a nice dress, a dress that you could wear later, sort of like what a bridesmaid's dress is not. And there's George, and George wore a bit of lace. You can see it. He's got a jabot there, a lace one. And Alexander Hamilton, as Secretary of the Treasury, was charged with taking a census of the new nation's manufacturing. And he sent out Reverend Joseph Dana to figure out exactly how much lace was being made in Ipswich and how much it was worth, and all that, because they wanted to know where we were starting. So in 1786, women in Ipswich were making 42,000 yards of silk bobbin lace. I believe that's for a year. There were about 600 women and girls who made, well, here it says 41,979. That's like 42,000. And the value was 2,000 pounds sterling. We hadn't adopted an American dollar yet. So Reverend Dana snipped off little pieces of this lace and he sent it to Hamilton. So it's, and he also sent his report. And the part I like about this report is you can see it close to the bottom where it kind of rounds it off and he goes, call it 600 pounds. But yeah, he gave his report and his lace snippets. So these snippets, let's see how many are there. 21 samples altogether. You can find it on the Library of Congress's website if you want, and you can also read a whole book about Ipswich lace. it's been invaluable. It's still in Hamilton's papers, and it's just been very helpful for textile enthusiasts to try to figure out how the lace was made, you know, to recreate it, how they, you know, which piece of thread they put where, and all that sort of stuff. So now things started to change in the 1700s, and machines came in. This is machine-made lace. I mean, excuse me. And by the time of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's wedding in 1840, there were ways to make some machine lace. Often what was done was they would make the netting on a machine and then do hand embellishments. But Queen Victoria was a trendsetter, and she set trends that continue today. As I said before, wedding dresses were colored. You know, typically, well, she wanted a white dress, and people had a fit because white was considered as something associated with death. But she got her way, and she had British Honiton lace embellish her dress. And I believe she also had a diamond ring, and that was a new thing to do. So the white lace, wedding dress, diamond rings, all that stuff, you know, you can blame it on Queen Victoria. Now, to make her lace, her Honiton lace, it was made in Devon, England. It took more than 200 people from March to November in 1839 to make 4 yards, a 4-yard flounce of lace. Well, as time went on, you know, people figured that they could make this machine lace and it would still give the look and feel and be a lot less expensive. And so there was a real rise in the 1800s of machinery and different types of machinery to do this. This is lace from 1890 to 1910, made on a machine. And you can see the little threads tying it together, so it looks like needle lace, but it's not. And, you know, things just really started to change. Well, around the turn of the century, the 1890s to early 1900s, missionaries and organizations like the American Red Cross latched onto lace making as a potential way to bring people out of poverty or out of poor conditions. Of course, they did this just at the same time as the rise of mechanized lace. So they were like a day late and a dollar short, but they did it. So they reached out to the Native Americans in California, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Wisconsin, and set to making the Native Americans learn how to make lace. And there's still at the Oneida Indian or Native American Museum in Wisconsin a display of Oneida Native American lace. And sometimes the patterns that they chose, the ones that I saw, tended to be racially insensitive, you know, things that were associated with American Indians, but not necessarily very accurate to their culture. So now this is in the Philippines. You can see the girls are in a lace school. They've got their bobbins and all that. This is in Jerusalem. The American Red Cross was involved in this one. Now, the handmade lace faction, when mechanized lace became more widely available, like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to fight back, they started calling their lace real lace. And you've probably heard that term. They had real lace on it. Well, what they're saying is they had handmade bobbin or needle lace. This is in Italy. Now, looking for lace. Again, I go back to where I started. Like, I was wondering, like, well, can you still get this stuff, you know? I mean, is it around? And the short answer is not much. Not Practically no, okay? It's now the purview of hobbyists and researchers, okay, to find a new length of handmade lace. Now you can buy it from some countries, like I believe the Ukraine, some of the women there, you know, because they're desperate to make a living and they have the time and they have the needle skills and the ability to do it. And so you can find, like, I believe it's Ukrainian handmade bobbin lace. You'll find it advertised on Etsy, places like that. You can find it in, if you go to Sri Lanka, I'm sure it's a holdover from a missionary effort. They have locally made lace. You can also find it sold in the old centers like Brussels, but you have to realize, I was talking to the director of one of the lace museums, and he said, you know, sometimes it's not really made in Belgium. They might sell it in Belgium to tourists, but, you know, like other things, it may be made in Asia or some other place. You can find real handmade lace at trade shows and markets in Europe. The people that are keeping this alive tend to be hobbyists, guilds. It's just like quilting and embroidery and all those other needle skills, women's skills. You're going to look for guilds. Now, you can find old pieces. As I said before, you can get it on online auctions like eBay, Etsy, flea markets, estate sales, or antique shops. But what you can't find is reasonably priced handmade yards of lace. And even designers, high-end designers, they've all gravitated to machine-made lace because it looks so much like the handmade, and it's affordable, you know? People just are unwilling to pay the labor costs for the other. So this is a picture of a bunch of stuff that I have at my house. And it's just, you may have something similar, but you can see I have things from my Greek relatives, that gold trim. The Greeks, at least in my family, like real gold. And so they've used machine-made gold trim on their embroidery. There's some Victorian St. Gall embroidery with lace. And the little pink thing on the bottom right is an asafoetida bag from my great-grandmother. And you can see it's a wishbone, and she's crocheted lace around this wishbone of a bird and made a little pouch. And the deal was, to keep yourself from getting influenza, you stuck a hunk of really nasty smelling asafoetida gum, which is a plant material, in that pouch, and you wore it around your neck. So, so that's what that was. Now, another way you might have old lace or handmade lace is inherited pieces. This is a picture of my great-grandparents in their ice cream parlor. My great-grandmother's on the far right, that's Mary Rosalie, and her husband Thomas Jefferson Harrell's in the middle, and his, I believe it's his sister, Mary, is to his side. So they're in Dayton selling ice cream. But Mary Rosalie's mother was from Aosta, the place that I showed you, where the nuns taught people how to make bobbin lace. And her father was a textile worker. So they were big into textiles. So I think that's one reason I have like multiple pieces from her. And you might be like that too. You might have like a wedding veil. That's a pretty common thing. Or christening gowns, caps, little bits of lace. But let me tell you, you know, you get responsibility when you get inherited pieces. Now, this is my great Aunt Evelyn. And at one point in time, my mother brought me a small, like, greeting card box. But when I opened it, it wasn't greeting cards. It was a voice from the past. It was my great Aunt Evelyn's note My mother's little book, necklaces, and handkerchiefs. Take good, underlined twice, care of them. So she gave me all this, stuff, lace, and I have to, what do you do with it? How do you store it? How do you make sure it doesn't rot? How do you keep it clean? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Generally, if you have some old lace, you want to store it wrapped in unbleached muslin or some inert material similar to that. You want to fold it, and there's some recommendations that you keep it in a cardboard box. Now you can buy acid-free cardboard boxes and tissues and that type material. And then you bring it out like at least once or twice a year and air it out a little bit and refold it, because if you keep it folded along the same lines, the cloth will rot. The other thing is you might need to clean it. Now, if it's sturdy, then you could try cleaning it yourself. And the way you do this is the one recommendation, like I've tried using OxyClean, which is it's an oxygen-based bleach, not chlorine bleach. And that's been pretty successful. But I found a textile specialist who recommended Orvis WA paste, capital W, capital A. And this is a non-detergent cleaner, which everybody in Loudoun County is going to love it. You can also wash your horse and your dogs with it, okay? But supposedly that's good. And you want to handle it very gently. Sometimes, depending on the piece, it will be sewn between two cotton sheets, okay? And when you sew it, you don't sew through the thread of the lace, you sew through the holes, okay? And wash that to hold it together. But if it's at all delicate, you're going to get a specialist to do it. Now, the other question, nope, I'll go back to here. How do you tell machine lace from handmade lace? And the short answer, again, is it's not easy. The number one recommendation that I found, the first thing in a list of about 6 ways to determine whether it's machine made or not, is to buy a magnifying glass that's 8 to 10 times. So you could look at it under a microscope, or you could look at it under a magnifying glass. Basically, the first thing to know is if it's polyester or rayon, it's machine made. So that's easy. The rest of it, you just have to think about it. If it's made by a machine, it's not going to be made in some ways as precisely as if it's made by hand. And so there's a general fuzziness, they call it garbledness, unclearness about some machine-made lace. So you might be able to pick that up. Because if you think about it, a machine is going to just churn out lace over time for hours. And so there's not a good stopping place. And so the threads run out. And so those threads, as they run out, are going to be popped up and leave a little tuft, So when you see those tufts or fuzziness, then it's probably machine made. Now, some lace, the one side matches the other side exactly. And in others, it's going to look like you have a top and then an offside. Now, if they match, if they're identical, the front and the back, maybe that means it's machine made. I'm sorry to be like this, but if there's embroidery, okay, so if there's something that they add as an embellishment that's only on the top, then the top is not going to match the bottom. It's going to be handmade. Okay, I'll say that again. If it has raised work on one side and not on the bottom, that's generally going to be handmade. Let's see. But bobbin lace, because it's actually braided, is always going to be the same on both sides. Okay, so I don't know if that helped you very much, except generally think about it. And if everything's neat and tidy, then it was probably done by hand. Some woman, you know, hid their knots, made sure everything was tucked in, versus a machine that's just kind of churning something out that looks good enough. Okay, you cannot count on the complexity of the pattern to determine if it's handmade or not, because as you can see with this piece, machine made can be pretty complex. Okay, back to where I was. Now, if you want to learn more about handmade lace, a good place to start is the International Organization of Lace, Inc. It's a nonprofit. It's dedicated to the study and preservation of all types of lace, and it has chapters in 24 countries. So again, it's the International Organization of Lace. They have a website, and they just have loads of information. Now, the other thing you can do is visit a lace museum. Of course, nowadays it's going to be most likely virtually, and there's a lot in flux right now. But I do know the Laces Museum in Berkeley is posting things online, and when able, they offer classes and have a lot going on, and that's the LACIS Museum in Berkeley. And again, I'll put this in a resource sheet for you. There have been museums in Brussels, in Bruges, in Venice. There's a little town called Arenas de Mar in Spain that has a lace museum, but if you don't read Spanish, you're going to be kind of lost, I think. Alençon, France has a lace museum. There has been one in Detroit. You know, the thing to do is, though, to check ahead of time. You might find more online than you actually find when you go to, if you go to visit in person, because a lot of times these collections can be stored away for preservation reasons. So lace, I hope you have a little bit better understanding of why it's sort of mysterious and highly valued, and how important it was, you know, in history. I have a little quote from Coco Chanel. This is Coco smoking, which of course she shouldn't be, but she said, "I consider lace to be one of the prettiest imitations ever made of the fantasy of nature. Lace always evokes for me those incomparable designs which the branches and leaves of trees embroider across the sky, and I do not think that any invention of the human spirit could have a more graceful or precise origin." So I like that. And I want to thank you. And there's my website, which again, it's just my name.com. And those are lace curtains. And those are made, I think, in Scotland using machine settings from the 1800s. And I just really like them. So thank you.